Hey, I'm Brian, and this is Vinyl Paints. Today, we're going to be working on a 16F cell, the biggest cell I can get my hands on. The only thing bigger than this cell is the news I'm about to share.
Good news, everyone!
Well, what is it?
I'll be exhibiting at Niagara Falls Comic Con, June 5th through 7th. I'm really excited. I'll share more details as we get closer, but I'll be working on some special paintings just for the convention. I hope to see you there. In this video, we'll be going over the history and some information on the 16F cell, and then later on in the video, we'll be doing a history of Street Fighter in cell animation. I don't have enough subscribers to unlock timestamps, so I'll post a card here. It's hard to appreciate how large a 16F cell is. I was so excited to use this because I got a 16F port key from Chromacolor, but I didn't realize that my port key doesn't fit my current setup, so I won't be able to use it on this painting, which is disappointing, but next time. I actually struggled to find information on 16F cells. I can tell you it's the largest American common size. I mean, common as in people recognize it exists, but not that most productions ever used it. In fact, I'm not even 100% sure on what the actual size is, as it seems to be more of a range rather than a standard size. So I've seen everything from 12.5 by 16.5 to 13.5 by 17 listed as a 16F cell. Now, I know there's such a thing as like oversized or untrimmed cells, which can probably account for some of that, but it's still all over the place. And I haven't been able to find a definitive answer as to why the sizes seem to vary. I did find several sources that said the 16F cell was the Disney standard during the Xerox era, which went from 1961 to 1977, but I found films that went all the way into the late 80s that still used it. The earliest film I found that used 16F was 101 Dalmatians, and the latest film, or the newest one, being The Little Mermaid. I did find cells from both The Little Mermaid and Oliver that used 12F cells as well as 16F cells, so they may not have been exclusively 16F. I had other people tell me it was only used for theatrical or for specialty shots, such as panning shots, but if it was only for theatrical, it was not universally adopted. It does seem that Don Bluth used it for Land Before Times, All Dogs Go to Heaven, and American Tail, but it wasn't exclusively used, as I found both 16F and 12F cells for all those films. Don Bluth being a former Disney animator, it makes sense that he would continue using the system that he was familiar with, but other feature film animators didn't seem to use it. The Ralph Bakshi cells I found for Fire and Ice, Cool World were all on 12F, as well as most of the Hanna-Barbera cells from that time. Warner Brothers seemed to use 12F, but they were all from TV shows, so not quite theatrical. As for panning or specialty shots being on 16F, I can't confirm that. There are just so many random sizes that I don't really know if they fit into a typical field size. Internationally, they didn't use it either. Europe used a 15F cell, 12.48 by 15.98, and Japan had its own variant at 9.44 by 13.77. At least that's what they used on films like Akira. So what can we conclude? It seems like 16F was a Disney theatrical standard. It probably became the standard approximately around the beginning of the Xerox era and was phased out around Oliver and Company and The Little Mermaid. I say around because I found 12F and 16F cells from Oliver and Company and The Little Mermaid, and after that, Disney did not make any cell animated feature films, so most of their TV was done on 12F. Besides Disney, it seems like the only other animators to use 16F were former Disney employees like Don Bluth or Disney co-productions like Roger Rabbit. So it is a bit of an odd cell. And it makes sense they wouldn't continue to use this cell because it is significantly larger, which means every time you work on a 16F cell, you're spending more time to complete it. But when you're dealing with scale, it allows you to actually draw bigger things on there, which allow you to get more details in there. So I can see why this didn't become a standard cell, as kind of I think of 12F as the standard cell that most productions used, but I can see the advantages of using this, especially in theatrical. I will say it does feel really special to paint on an oversized cell like this. I think it's safe to say this is the largest cell I've ever painted. It's just slightly bigger than that fiber optic painting I did earlier on in this channel. I did have to do a couple of different things on this painting. I painted this one at the same time as the Dark Hado, which is the Ken Ryu Akuma one that you've seen earlier in this channel. So I was going back and forth between the two. And I realized really early on, because of the amount of characters, consistency of line width for the black outlines was really important to me. And since it had so many characters, I didn't want to risk it and use a dip pen. I'm pretty comfortable with the dip pen, but I thought that the technical pen would just give me a consistent line width, so I decided to go with that, minus a few details, and obviously the technical pens can't do color, so all the colored line art was done with dip pen as well. Another advantage to using technical pens on this one is I'm fairly confident in my dip pen skills, but just the nature of working on such an oversized cell with so many characters, I had to attack it from a lot of strange angles. So technical pens are a little bit easier to use, and it just seemed like the right choice. I also find that technical pens emulate the Xerox effect closer, like they seem to match up in terms of width better, and I kind of wanted that kind of a line feel to these. As I mentioned, you are sacrificing expressiveness for the more consistent line width, but I do have multiple different size nibs for the technical pens, so even though I can't transition from one thickness to another on a curve, I can still choose my line width. So the art style and the general design of these characters are based on the Street Fighter HD remix by Udon, who did all the artwork for it. And I took a lot of the color choices from the game. I did have to swap out a few for aesthetic reasons or just because of cell paint color availability, but I knew from the early stages of the line art that my biggest obstacle was going to be scale.
Ease up on the front. Watch for that crosswind. Level it out. They're drifting. Keep your eyes on the far end of the runway. The brake. Hold the right handle.
I just want to tell you both good luck. We're all counting on you.
Push up button.
Every time I started on a new character, I felt escalating pressure. Yes, you can fix a mistake when cell painting, but it's not easy and not always effective. I think for me the most stress came during the line art phase, because every time I finished a character, I had invested that much time in. And if I continued and made a mistake, it could have resulted in me having to restart. Line art is one of the hardest things to redo and fix on a cell. It actually took me a couple of days to finish the line art, mainly because I had large areas that I had to wait for drying before I could kind of continue, as well as there were so many colors for secondary colors that have to do with the dip pen, with like the reds and the blues, that it just became a long process. As I mentioned before, I had two paintings on the go at the same time, so I decided to do my color application almost layered like, where I would do one color at a time on all the characters. Because of the amount of characters on this painting, I realized quite quickly that I didn't have enough unique skin tone bases to really do an individual color for each character. So I used this as an opportunity to try the new paints I got from Ropo Art Supply, which is a vinyl paint from Japan, on certain skin colors. And I know that using a different paint shouldn't feel like that big of a deal, but when you're working physically and it's not easy to edit things, using a paint actually that you've never used before is a big deal. And I think risk is one of the most underappreciated things about physical artwork. I can't speak for every medium because each one has its own way of dealing with mistakes, but with cell painting, mistakes are a huge problem and often result in having to either start over or trying to find a workaround. And because nowadays we're so familiar with modern editing options like the ability to zoom in, for example, I don't draw digitally often, but when I do, I have the ability to zoom in on the eye so I can work on a bigger scale and not have to worry about trying to cram all the details into such a small area. But that's not something you can do on a cell or on a painting. And on this painting, several times, I ended up in a situation where I realized that my actual nib size was too large for the line art. And I had to choose how to interpret that on the cell. Because if I actually tried to transfer all those lines onto that part, it probably would have ended up a giant blob. So at times, I had to decide not to do certain lines because it was just too risky for the actual piece, or maybe it was unnecessary. So now that we talked a little bit about the painting process and 16F cells, let's talk about the history of Street Fighter in animation. Well, in cell animation. The history of Street Fighter in animation is almost as long as the history of the game. For purposes of this video, we're going to kind of break it into two eras, the cell animation era and the digital era, but I'll be mainly focusing on the cell animation era because this is a cell painting channel. The first animated Street Fighter project was 1994's Street Fighter II, the animated movie. It is considered by fans and most critics to be the best depiction of Street Fighter in any non-video game media. Directed by, and I apologize for name pronunciation here, Kisaburo Sugi, who also is known for directing Lupin III and the director of a lot of Astro Boys, and it was produced and animated by Group TAC and featured characters designed by Shuko Murase, who would later on design the characters for Final Fantasy IX and Mobile Suit Gundam Wing. On a personal note, it has one of my favorite animated fights, Chun-Li versus Vega. This fight was vicious, visceral, and the lighting looks straight out of a movie. Cells for this series are rare. You might only find them go to auction every year or so, and they usually are on the higher side in terms of several hundreds of dollars. Some interesting facts about Studio TAC is that they worked on Superman the animated series. Don't know how that happened, but it is a little bit interesting. TAC would also would kind of become the de facto Street Fighter animation studio, as they would do Street Fighter 2V and Street Fighter Alpha, but they would go bankrupt in 2010. 1995 seemed to be a very good year for Street Fighter in animation. In 1995, Capcom released an animated documentary, that's right, documentary, called Street Fighter: The Return to Fujiwara Capital. An animated documentary made for an exhibition celebrating Fujiwara. This festival went on for a few months in 1995, and the movie was screened at the festival as well as it was available to purchase at the festival on VHS. It's actually an interesting idea where the characters from Street Fighter are transported in time to the former capital of Japan, and they go around a bit, kind of like a sightseeing history lesson, think Magic School Bus. It's really rare, but thanks to the internet, you can find it, but don't expect any fighting. This is straight up educational, and that's kind of different, but also amazing. It seems to share a lot of the same designs as the 1994 movie. However, it was animated by Studio Pierrot, which would later go on to make Naruto, Bleach, Tokyo Ghoul, and Yu Yu Hakusho. In terms of cell collecting, I have never heard or seen a cell from this film go to auction, or even in anyone's collection. So I don't know if there's any in the wild, so cells from this might be the most rare of any Street Fighter project. 1995 would also have two different cell animated Street Fighter series released. The one released in North America was called Street Fighter, the animated series. I tried to watch this in order to prepare for this video. It was a hard watch. On the plus note, because it was animated in the US and Canada, it's actually fairly easy to find cells from this series. Although it's not my favorite character design, they did feature all 16 characters in the series, so you can probably find your favorite. Most of the cells I have seen for this series are not overly expensive. I don't think this series is very well regarded, and you can usually pick them up for $20 to $40 range. I have a few in my collection. I'll try to show them on screen now. In regards to what I learned about the show, apparently it's a semi-sequel to the live-action movie, which I do hold a soft spot for. In fact, I'll straight up say I love it. I do wonder if this is the show that inspired that weird G.I. Joe Street Fighter collab. They released Street Fighter figures, but they were G.I. Joes, but they were Street Fighter. I don't really remember too much about them, just I remember that being a thing. The main animation companies behind this both seem to have folded, but it does look like they had to outsource some of their work to Madhouse, and they did some of the work on season 2. The other Street Fighter series released in 1995 was Street Fighter II V. The V stands for Voyage, although some refer to the series as Victory. This is my version of Street Fighter. I love so much about this show. The animation's good, the music is amazing. Most of my favorite characters make appearances. Unfortunately, the series, it didn't do too well. And apparently, since it was the same team who made the movie, who made the TV show, they tried to recapture that glory by making it resemble more the movie towards the end of it, which is unfortunate because I really like the idea of traveling around the world, learning the mysteries of the Hado, as well as the different fighting styles. The arc in Kowloon Palace is amazing. If you've ever seen the old movie The Warriors, it's pretty much the Warriors crossover with Street Fighter. It's amazing. It also has some amazing fights. Ken versus Vega, as Ryu's learning how to control the Hado, just absolute cinema. Cells from this are in a weird place. I don't see too many of them become available, but also when they are available, sometimes they don't seem to sell quickly. I recently repaired my Ken cell from this series. I had been watching that for over a year before I got it. So I don't really know how to place this, as in there aren't a lot available, but then they don't seem to move particularly quickly. But they are significantly more expensive than cells from Street Fighter, the American series. As I already hinted at, it was mainly the same team as Street Fighter the animated movie, with Gisaburo Sugi coming back to direct. But clearly they scaled down the budget, as they did have to do a lot of recaps, and at times the animation did suffer. Street Fighter Alpha, the animation, is the last cell animated Street Fighter project I could find. Released in 2000, it pretty much just came out before studios started to switch to digital painting. I actually had my eye from a cell from this series during a recent Heritage auction, but unfortunately it went for more than I was willing to spend. I've definitely seen a few cells from this series, but they are not common and expect to drop hundreds of dollars on a single cell. Directed by, once again, forgive my pronunciation, Shigeyusu Yamauchi, this would be the last Street Fighter worked on by Studio Tak. It wasn't my favorite, but I really like what they did with the artistic design and the aesthetics of this one. It has a bit of a watercolor feel to it. I don't really know how to describe it, but it's definitely a unique style for a cell painting. Overall, I think just for the aesthetics of it, it is worth watching. It also features some very smooth animation, and I know it's not held in the same regard as some of the other Street Fighter releases, but it is worth the watch. This is a bit of a weird one. The next project was Street Fighter Alpha Generations. It does not seem to be cell animated. As I said, I'm pretty sure Alpha was the last animated one, or cell animated one, but this one was made by Studio APPP and not Studio Tak. By early 2005, most animes had already transitioned over to digital, so it doesn't make any sense that they would do this one in cell animation. Another reason for me suspecting that it wasn't done via cell animation was that this was not really a full release. Generation seems to be the first Street Fighter to be released only for the North American markets at first, and that seems to be the beginning of a strategic shift by Capcom to focus on shorter non-theatrical releases. After this, other non-cell animated Street Fighter projects would come out, including Street Fighter 4, The Ties That Bind Us in 2009, and a bunch of OVAs such as Chun-Li's Prologue, Sea Viper, and Yuri. With the upcoming Street Fighter movie coming out soon, I'm really hoping this reinvigorates the franchise and we get some more animated projects. As a fan of cell animation and Street Fighter, I do feel very lucky that we got so many cell animated projects for this, and I do have a feeling that we haven't seen the end of Street Fighter in animated form yet. Well, I hope you enjoyed this kind of wrap up on the 16F cell as well as the history of Street Fighter and cell animation. I'm really excited for this upcoming convention, June 5th through 7th, Niagara Falls Comic Con. I hope to see you there, but till then, I'm Brian, and this is Vinyl Paints.